technique is loved or hated. Flatland bob, these are real hard to find nowadays. Ah, shit. Bobber and the jig trick. It's always nice of them when they wait for the bobber to come into your view and actually hit it. Oh, I got the toad so far. Chunky bro. Private stock on say Wednesday, and they're having a tournament Saturday. So they were charging people to get in the park. There's a heavy load upon my back, no way to throw it off. Yeah. Yeah, nice size little state stalker. And that red inchworm. You need to fish right where I was fishing. You can see the bobber a lot better. And obviously the fish are there.
Getting dead. It's not where I'm standing.
Yeah, well, I think you can just see the bobber better over there. Yeah.
Holy ashtray!
All right, ladies and gents, I want to take a quick break from the video to show you what I'm doing out there. We'll start with the rods and reels I'm using first. This is my main mini jig rod. This is a Katana K4. It's a 7'6" ultralight fishing rod. I have it paired with the 1000 series reel. This is a Shimano Stella 1000. For line, I have a Sinister Strand premium fiber braid in 4-pound. And then I use a leader. Anytime I use colored braid, I use a fluorocarbon leader of Runkle Power Fluoro in 5-pound. And then the length of the leader usually depends on whether I'm fishing ultralight fishing or if I'm fishing something a little bit heavier. But for ultralight fishing, I usually use about a 5 to a 6 foot leader, and I attach it with a small double uni nut. Now, if you want to do this bobber and a mini jig technique, you don't have to have this custom rod set up. You can use any ultralight rod as long as it's about 7'6" to 8 foot in length, any 1000 or 500 series spinning reel, and just about any line. You know, you can go with 4-pound mono. If you don't have any braid or you're not comfortable using braid, you can use fluorocarbon in the 2 to 4 pound range. And it just doesn't matter as much, especially with this technique, because the mini jigs are extremely light. But if you're fishing with the bobber adds a little bit of weight, especially if you have a rattle bobber. There's a little bit of bits of buckshot or BBs in there that gives the bobber weight. So it's much easier to cast, because the idea with these custom setups and the fancy braid and all that is when you're throwing the mini jigs by themselves, they're extremely light, and you just want to be able to get a good cast. And that's really 90% of the battle when fishing mini jigs, is just getting it out there far enough to where you have a chance of getting at the fish and giving a nice presentation to bring it in or walk it into where the fish are. So now let's go to the bench and I'll show you the rattle bobbers and the baits I'm using that are working out there today. We'll start with the weights and the different types they have. And Mike is using an inchworm and I'm using a jig. So these are two different types of 32nd ounce weights. This is the type you use with the inchworms and the minnows, this ball head. And then this is a tube jig weight here, same weight, 32nd ounce. And this is what we use inside the tube jigs. Now I'll show you the baits that are working out there. And the first one is the one I start off using in the morning. It's a mini jigs, 2-inch mini jig, and it's made by Golden State Fishing. This is a bullfrog. Later in the day, the fish got a little bit more finicky, and I went down to a micro jig that's also made by Golden State Fishing, and this one's baby bluegill. And as you can see, it's half the size of this mini jig. Well, that's why they call it a micro jig. So this is 1 inch long, but we use the same exact tube jig weights in it. So usually a 32nd. The 16th will fit in these regular size mini jigs, but these micros, it's just too big for them. So the biggest you can go is a 32nd, and that's typically what I use. Sometimes I'll go down to a small one like a 64th or a 48. But usually that's not necessary. Usually the 32nd will suffice. Now what Mike is having a lot of success with is this Golden State inchworm, this red one right here. And then this is the one you use the ball head on. So I'll show you how I hook these ball heads on, and then I'll show you how to rig up a micro jig, and it's really the same as a mini jig. But we get our ball head, lead head here, and it's very similar to hooking up a minnow. So we start right in the middle at the top of the worm, the thickest part of the worm, and you slide it onto the hook, just so it's going around the bend, just like a minnow, and pop it through, and slide that up, so it looks just like that. Nice and straight, and the tail's got all kinds of action, okay? Now, the micro jigs, we're using the same 32nd that I'd use in a mini jig, but we're putting it in the micro jig. You just have to be a little bit more careful because obviously a micro jig is much smaller. So I take the eye of the hook and slide it into the skirt and carefully, very carefully slide it on till the lead head's all the way at the top. And I just use my thumb to push that eye of the hook through, and it comes out, comes out looking just like that. And you can do the same, the reverse, where you run the hook through the top and slide the lead head in. That also works on these micro jigs. You just have to be extra careful because there's a lot less rubber than on this 2-inch mini jig. So as long as you're careful with it, you can rig them exactly the same. You just have to be a little more careful. Now the most important thing is these rattle bobbers or weighted bobbers. See, these two types, like this one's a rattling bob, these are real hard to find nowadays. This is a rattle bobber I found on Amazon. Same principle, basically. But all they have is a little bit of bird shot in here, I believe. Real small BBs or pellets, but they have a little bit of rattle. But the biggest thing about these is not so much the rattle, it's the weight. Because the buckshot or bird shot in here gives it a little bit of weight so you can throw it out there, yet it still is able to float so you can see the strike indicator. And that makes it much easier to throw like these little tiny inchworms on a 32nd or even these micros out there, and then you can work them extra so you can even let them sit in the water, and sometimes you get a strike without even moving it. But if you can't find these rattle bobbers, they also have weighted bobbers, so there's no rattle to it. There's just a little lead ring down here, but it gives it just enough weight so it'll float, but you can make a good cast. Now, typically when I'm setting these rigs up, I usually give about a 5-foot leader is pretty standard from the bottom of my bobber down to my my bait or my jig, usually about 5 feet. If it's shallower, shorten up that leader. If it's deeper, you can go a little bit longer, but with a 7'6" rod or an 8-foot rod, the longer you go, if you go beyond 5 feet, the harder it's going to be to cast it. So typically a 5 foot leader is good enough. Like I haven't had any instances that I can think of where I went to like a 6 or 7 foot leader, and that was the key. It's usually a 5 foot. If I'm not getting bit at that, I move on to something else typically. All right, now that we've gotten through that, let's go back out to the water, and I'm going to show you some underwater footage I captured with my new underwater drone. Very interesting, and I think we'll see why the bobber and the mini jig technique is most effective on this day.
All right, guys, see what we got going on here. Driving, starting to see. Oh, there's a crappie. Oh, now we're starting to see some weeds here. Oh, pretty tall weeds. Almost looks like kelp. I think that's what we were hitting earlier with our jigs. Oh, yeah. Looks like we got a kelp forest out here. And we can make our way through all this and see what we can see. Oh, there's some more crappie. Oh, there's some trout. Couple bows right there. That's what we're after. Looks like another crappie off there in the distance. Yep, another crappie. There's a whole school of them hanging out. Yeah, they're right above that kelp. There's another one. And for those of you guys that don't know, this lake is loaded with small crappie. But they're pretty fun to catch, actually. Oh, another crappie. Yeah, another one. Another one, another one. God, these things are everywhere. Lots and lots of kelp here, or weeds. I don't know what type of plants those are. I'm not a botanist, but looks like kelp. Oh, there's a bass. Well, the tail of a bass. Man, there's a lot of freaking weeds out here. Another crappie here. See what, oh, there's a good sized bass off in the distance. Well, so essentially you can see a lot of kelp in the water, but all the fish, including the trout, are hanging out right above it. So that seems to be why the bobber and the jig is so effective right now, because they don't have a lot of space to go. They got to hang out right above those weeds.
All right, now let's go back out to the lake. I'm going to show you a little game film and show you how I'm working these baits back under a bobber. But one thing of note, this technique is one of those techniques that's either loved or hated, especially with guys that have been throwing mini jigs for a while. But it can be a really effective and easy technique. But the biggest trick to it is managing your line. And when that bobber goes down, if you have a lot of slack in your line, you're going to take those extra few seconds to reel in your slack so you can set the hook. And lots of times you're going to miss the fish because they don't hang on to it very long. That bobber will pop down and pop right back up that quick. So you have that time, like 2 seconds, to really set that hook. It's very rare they'll take that bobber down with like there's bait on it, because it's just a rubber jig. So it's still a prey drive bite and a reactionary bite. It probably doesn't taste good to them. So once they bite it, they're going to realize real quick it's not real food, and they're going to try and spit it out. So as long as you manage your line, you can get the hookups. But that's the key to this technique, is managing your line. So let's go back out there, and I'll show you how I'm working these back.
All right, guys, you can see here we're back at the lake, casting out. And with that weighted bobber on there, you can see I get a real good cast without even trying. So what I'm doing is just slightly popping the rod about 2 or 3 times, and then I reel down into the bobber. But I don't want to move the bobber, because the idea is I want that jig to come up in the water and then slowly fall undisturbed. So all I'm doing when I'm reeling back into it is I'm retrieving the slack. So take note of my reel. As I'm reeling back in, I'm just doing about a full crank to maybe a crank and a half or 2, just enough to get that slack in. So I keep that bobber kind of undisturbed, because when the fish is going to bite is when that jig settles on the bottom. So we look at the bobber here. It gets in closer to the strike zone, and then boom, it goes down, and then I set the hook. And because I manage my slack correctly, I'm able to get that hook set. And that's all you have to do. Like I said earlier, the hardest part about this technique is managing your line slack. Get that down and you'll be all set.
Geo Micro. All right, ladies and gents, there you have it. Great day on the water at Green Valley. That's probably my favorite lake down here in SoCal to fish. So glad to get back out there again. As you can see, there's still a little bit of snow on the ground, so it's still quite cold up there. And the ice probably came off the lake just a month or two ago. So there were some holdovers in there. I don't believe we hooked up in any. I think Fish and Game was out there about 4 or 5 days before we were there and stocked. And I think that's most of what we were catching. But as you can see, at the beginning of the morning, when we first started fishing, I was just fishing a regular 32nd or 16th, can't really remember, mini jig. And every cast, working it slow or fast, I was getting moss on the jig. So I was having to clean it off. And so I knew there was a weed moss bed out there. And as you saw in that drone footage, that's exactly what was happening. So that's why we decided to go with the bobber and the jig. Tried it out a couple times and hooked up and hooked up again. And that seemed to be the technique that was working. Later in the day, I switched it up. I threw some RHA spoons, got some on spoons. And then I did eventually get some on just a mini jig later in the day in certain spots where the weeds weren't as bad. I was able to work it slow enough. But that's what's important, or the biggest takeaway from this video is learn the terrain while you're fishing. You know, you don't have to have a drone or a camera under there to figure these things out. Like I could tell when my lure's coming back with a bunch of weeds and moss on it, there's a lot of weeds and moss out there. You know, I'm not working it close to the bottom. I was working in mid-column and still hitting it. So we have to adjust. So we got to figure the fish aren't going to be down in the weeds. Trout really don't like to do that too much. So they got to be just above them, which turns out where they were. So we got to figure out a way to work that upper part of the column, that open water. So when we find the trout, we know what part of the water they're in, which is the upper to the middle column of water, and how to keep our bait there and how to work it slowly. And the solution was working a mini jig under a bobber like we did. So always be on the lookout for that. When you cast out at any lake, when you're starting out, figure out how deep it is first. You know, are there a lot of trees or debris down there? You're going to get snagged. Look around, see what's on the shoreline. Are there a bunch of big rocks? Are there a bunch of fallen trees? Or if not, you know, maybe there's just a bunch of weeds down there. See how long it takes for your baits to go to the bottom or sink to the bottom. See if you're getting anything when you work the bottom and work up from there. Or work the top and slowly let it sink a little bit more and a little bit more on each cast until you can at least figure out what's in the water or how deep it is, or you start getting bit. And that's literally what I do every time I'm at a different lake or a lake I know. Because these water conditions change. Weeds grow. Sometimes they're there. Sometimes they're not. All these things are always changing. So always be mindful of that. And the more you are, the more fish you're going to catch. So this video came out pretty timely. Green Valley Lake is having their official opener on May 11th. So that's this coming Saturday. A few things they want to announce. They've lowered their prices, which is really cool. It was $25 last season. Now it's back down to $20, which is a really good thing because I can't think of any lake I've ever fished where the prices came down. They always seem to go up each year or every other year a little bit. But this is a first. They actually lowered their prices. So that's really cool. And I was talking with the lake manager over there, and they have gotten a new lake management company to manage the actual water. Because guys that fish there a lot, you'll know that can get a lot of algae and weeds, especially as it gets warmer. It's a small body of water, and there's no way they can prevent it except with having these lake management companies come out and put these certain chemicals in the water. They are no longer using that blue stone that they've been using the past couple of years that seemed to just turn the bite off to the fish. Best theory is it wasn't killing the fish. I have lots of contact readings being out there when they had a small fish kill with the last stock last season, but that was just some of the freshly stocked fish. But the footage shows like there was a ton of fish. They were just on the bottom by the aerators and didn't want to bite a thing. And I think that has to do with that blue stone chemical they used to use because it does take up some oxygen in order to get those molecules to bind with the algae that's in the water and clear up the water. So it wouldn't kill the fish, but it'd certainly make them not feel good, and they didn't want to play anymore. So that was a real bummer. So they got this new company called Aqua Technics, and they use a lot more natural chemicals or items to put in the water and get rid of the weeds and algae that's supposed to not affect the fish at all and keep them more healthy and keep them on the chew. So very optimistic. Hoping this season is much better than the last two when they're using that blue stone stuff. Because as soon as I saw that stuff go in the water, I knew the next couple months weren't going to be great fishing. It just would make it tough. So hopefully this season and this new company gets it squared away. And the good news is that the folks at Green Valley Lake are really working to try and fix things and make the fishing as good as possible and get more people up there and get them on more fish. So as always, if you want any of the fine products I use on this channel, there's a QR code right up here. If you're interested in the Golden State Fishing custom baits, the waterline sunglasses, or the katana rods, just click on this QR code. It'll take you to a link tree, which has links to all the sites, including the discount codes and how to apply them. So just go on there, and especially on Waterland, I believe you get 15% off, but you got to use the hyperlink that's located in this link tree. And anything you buy, you get automatic 15% off. And with Golden State Fishing, anything you buy, if you enter in code CSpanker at checkout, you get 10% off. So a great deal on those products, and they're outstanding, and that's why I use them. So as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And hope to see you out there sometime. Got a lot coming up, especially with Sierra's just opened up. Did real good at the opener. So that video is coming down the pike. And Big Bear's getting real hot. Gregory, Green Valley, like we just talked about. Going up to Utah again soon. So a lot coming your way. So hopefully you tune in and see what we're doing here, because I got lots and lots planned and a lot more tutorials, and we're really going to get into the brass tacks or the nuts and bolts of trout fishing. And if there's anything you guys want to see, please leave it in the comments. I always like the suggestions, and there are lots of things I forget about. So please, if there's something you want to know about, put it down, and I may just do a video on it. So hope to see you guys out there, and tight lines.